Welcome to today's webinar on the Kittatinny Ridge, a global important bird area. We're so glad that you have all decided to join us. I wanted to take the opportunity to say thank you for joining during kind of these uncertain times. We're wishing everyone health and safety, and so glad that you're joining us to learn about the conservation efforts in the Kittatinny Ridge. So we have esteemed panelists joining us from Audubon, Pennsylvania, Appalachian Trail Conservancy, and the Nature Conservancy. So before we begin today, I wanted to go over just a few logistics. All of the attendees who are with us today are currently on mute, and that is to reduce background, so unintended or uncontrollable background noises during the webinar. At the end, we will have a time for question and answer and discussions. At that time, I will unmute everybody and you will have the opportunity to have discussion or ask questions of our panelists. You can also use the chat function, as you all just did, thank you, to ask any logistical questions throughout the webinar. And you can also use that to ask questions of the panelists, but we'll reserve those questions till the end, and then I'll go ahead and read them back aloud. So before turning it over to our panelists here, I wanted to highlight the area of the Pennsylvania Highlands. And so the coalition is hosting the webinar today. Here you can see the 4-state Highlands area. There's Pennsylvania, as well as areas of New Jersey, New York, and Connecticut. And this is a federally designated 4-state region. Below that, you can see the Pennsylvania Highlands. And the Pennsylvania Highlands is a 1.4 million acre region that encompasses areas of 13 counties, and it's home to ecologically and culturally significant sites and areas. So the Kittatinny Ridge that we're going to be hearing about today is a region that is just above the Pennsylvania Highlands with overlap in some areas. And as the saying goes, you know, wildlife knows no political boundaries, and birds are no exception to that. So we're really excited to hear about what our neighbors to the north have been doing with their conservation efforts. And without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Jeanne Ortize from PA Audubon.
Okay. Kimberly, I'm ready to share. Okay.
Sure thing. You could go ahead and share your screen.
Okay. I hope you can see it. Does it look okay? You can see it?
It looks great to me.
Great. Okay. I hope everybody else can see it. And
they can. I just heard from the chat, so we're looking good.
Excellent. Thank you, Kimberly, for inviting us here today to talk about the Kittatinny Ridge. This team is pretty excited to share. And also in these uncertain times, wishing everyone health and please be safe. I am going to give an overview of the Kittatinny Ridge project, and then I'm going to turn it over to Tyler Smith from the Nature Conservancy, and then on to Dennis Shaffer from the Appalachian Trail Conservancy. Again, my name is Jeanne Ortize. I am with the Audubon Pennsylvania, and I manage the Kittatinny Ridge project for Audubon and on behalf of DCNR. All right, trying to get it to advance. I'm not sure why, but my slides do not want to advance.
Maybe just give them a couple moments.
All right.
So we didn't have this problem in our practice, everyone.
No, we did not. Okay, let me try again. There we go. Sorry for that glitch. All right, the Kittatinny Ridge project has been going since the late 1990s, like 1998. It was designated a conservation landscape, the 8th in Pennsylvania, by the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources in 2018, so we're very excited to be a conservation landscape. The primary partners on this project are DCNR, Audubon Pennsylvania, the Appalachian Trail Conservancy, and the Nature Conservancy. Of course, we work with many partners up and down the ridge, including other nonprofits, land trusts, colleges and universities, and government at the federal, state, and local levels. Here's a map that shows you where the ridge runs in Pennsylvania. If you look in your upper right-hand corner, that's near the Delaware Water Gap. The ridge is represented in the yellow hash marks. It runs for 185 miles down to the Maryland line. There are 12 counties and 137 municipalities on the ridge. The Appalachian Trail runs along the ridge again. If you look in the upper right-hand corner of your screen, the blue hash mark, down the ridge until we get to about Carlisle, and then the AT heads south and the Tuscarora Trail continues west. And there are many metropolitan areas off the ridge, as you can see on the map. The Kittatinny Ridge is a global important bird area for the cerulean warbler, this beautiful bird that you see on the left of your screen. It is a primary migration corridor. It's Pennsylvania's most climate resilient landscape. It has 160 miles of the Appalachian Trail, and it is the headwaters for millions of people. So this is why it's such a critical landscape. It is part of the Atlantic Flyway, which is why we are presenting to you today. It's a migration superhighway for raptors and songbirds and wildlife, other wildlife. There are numerous hawk watches on the ridge, including Hawk Mountain Sanctuary and Wagner's Gap. It is largely forested, and that is why we're all working so hard to keep it that way as much as possible. And it's important as a mega greenway, that connectivity for humans, such as hikers on the Appalachian Trail, and wildlife. And as you saw on the map, there are many major metropolitan areas near the ridge. It faces threats, and I know those of us on the call or webinar are familiar with a lot of these, such as residential development and commercial expansion. We have warehouses lining the ridge up and down, energy production and transmission lines that are crossing the ridge, like gas pipelines, invasive plant species, and the ridge will have some impacts from climate change. I'm going to talk to you today about some of the initiatives of the Kittatinny Ridge Coalition. For example, we have conservation research that we support through our mini grant program. We are conducting return on environment reports for counties up and down the ridge. This documents the economic value of our natural resources on the ridge. And then that frames our municipal engagement and technical assistance. Right now, we're completing a strategic plan. This is for the Kittatinny Ridge Coalition, its structure and operations. We were hoping to complete that plan here in the spring, but with the pandemic, it looks like we probably won't complete that strategic plan until the end of the year. We also are starting a conservation plan for an updated conservation strategy on the ridge, and hoping to get that started later this year and finish it up next year. We have had a mini grant program for several years to help support partners up and down the ridge as they implement projects that support the conservation of the Kittatinny Ridge. Those mini grant applications can be turned in now. They are due April 30th. And those mini grant, the funding is dedicated for partners that have projects that will support the conservation of the ridge. Those are due April 30th. So you can go to the Kittatinny Ridge website at kittatinnyridge.org and go get more information on our mini grant program. We also are working hard to conserve land and protect the Appalachian Trail. So Tyler will be talking about land conservation efforts after I'm finished, and then Dennis will talk about the work on the Appalachian Trail. I wanted to share with you some of the exciting work that we have funded through the Kittatinny Ridge project, like Hawk Mountain Sanctuary's Broadwing Hawk Project. The coalition sponsored and tagged 3 birds as part of this project. The 3 broadwings were Kit, Regina, and Rosalie. And this was great over the past few years, especially in the winter when we were all hunkered down inside. We got to watch our birds migrate back and forth. You can see some of the results from the work on the left and where our birds went to. This is a map from Hawk Mountain Sanctuary. You can go to Hawk Mountain's website and get more information on this project. I wanted to share pictures of Regina. She's on the top there of your screen. And then sort of in the bottom center is Rosalie. She was named after Rosalie Edge. We have completed 8 of 12 county return on environment studies on the ridge. Again, these studies document the natural system services economic value. For example, we put a dollar amount on what natural system services are worth, what the health savings are worth because the air is being filtered by the forest, local recreation, and open space and water premiums. So again, we do one study for each county on the ridge. Our goal is to do all 12 counties, and right now we have completed our 8th, the last one being Lebanon, and we completed that about a month ago. On average, the value of return on environment per county is $1 billion per year. When we do a study, we work with a local steering committee, and then when the study is completed, we leave the steering committee with all kinds of products to help share the results of the return on environment studies. So we will leave behind a summary report, a brochure, a PowerPoint that they can take out to the community. And then for the first time in Lebanon County, we produced a video, which I'm going to show you next. If you are interested in our return on environment work, I point you to the Kittatinny Ridge website. We have a page that's called Return on Environment. And our partners on this return on environment work are Keystone Conservation Trust, Ben Goodman Creative, and Greener Planning. And I'm going to show you a video now that's 3 minutes long.
Nature has been a part of Lebanon County's heritage, culture, and economy for 300 years. Green, rolling farmlands and rugged, forested ridgelines are the backdrop to our lives. We come here for the quality of life, but our rural character and time-honored traditions are facing the winds of change. Farmland loss, pollution, water shortages, and aging population and changing climate will all impact our future. Forests, meadows, creeks, and wetlands. Our open spaces provide the natural systems that filter our water, clean our air, control flooding, and sustain our wildlife. They work 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, free of charge. By measuring the return on environment of Lebanon County's natural systems, we can understand nature's invisible financial value and make better decisions to maintain open space and support smart economic growth. Agriculture has been our leading industry for over a century. It brings in $350 million a year and protects the valuable open space that supports our natural systems. Pennsylvania Secretary of Agriculture, Russell Redding, has said Pennsylvania's economy, as well as the food supply of our region and beyond, depends on clean water and healthy, viable farms. The beauty of our natural environment attracts new business and invites tourism. Areas like the Appalachian National Scenic Trail, Swatara Creek Water Trail, Swatara State Park, and Lebanon Valley Rail Trail are popular spots for getting outdoors. Lebanon County's work and play lifestyle makes us more productive at our jobs and keeps us healthier and happier. Along the northern and southern borders of Lebanon Valley stand the Kittatinny Ridge and Furnace Hills, two internationally recognized migration areas for birds and wildlife. Their forests and wetlands provide the greatest return on investment. Is considered the most resilient landscape in the state for adapting to a changing climate. Pennsylvania's Constitution instructs us to conserve and maintain our natural resources for this generation and generations to come. If Lebanon County's economy is to remain strong, protection of our open spaces must be a community responsibility. By understanding the return on environment of our natural systems, we can create better policies and ensure more sustainable practices. Only then can Lebanon County build the foundation for a vibrant economy and a healthy community for the future.
Okay, I just want to share a couple more slides on ROE. We also take the data that comes in from the study and we turn it into a map. So if you look at the left-hand side of your screen, these are the results of the Lebanon County Return on Environment study. The highest return on environment is almost always, in every situation so far, the highest ROE is in the wetter areas like wetlands and riparian corridors, followed by the large forests. So on the map, you'll see the highest ROE, for example, the riparian corridors in bright blue. The bright green is the value of the forests, which also are high. And then the paler areas are the lowest return on environment, for example, open developed land. On the right bottom are some of the graphics that we produce as part of our reports. On the left side, the left pie chart, 309.8 million in annual savings from natural system services. And on the right, 183.9 million in local outdoor recreation. This is not tourism, but this is local recreation that does not have a negative impact on the environment. The benefits of ROE is that it's a way to put a dollar value on natural resources, which people tend to understand, a dollar value. And then they can be treated as assets, and it becomes more of an asset management system. It crosses political boundaries, and it helps communities prioritize what to protect first based on the highest ROE. And it has multiple uses. Results of ROE have been used to justify open space funding. Manada Conservancy and the Tri-County Planning Department just produced a natural resource inventory. You can find it on their websites, and they overlaid the results of ROE with zoning to see where it is and is not aligned. And it provides a framework for municipal outreach. So I want to show you this map on the right. It's an aerial, but I turned the ROE results on for a township that we've done. The ROE results are in bright green. We also turned on protected lands, trails, parks. And if you take the highest ROE and you start connecting that with lands that are protected and public lands, you can start to develop what we call a green ribbon landscape and see ways to reconnect the environment. Also on this map, I overlaid homeowners associations. So you can see clusters of residents that you can work with in a really effective way to start to reconnect those resources. So again, it really helps as a strategy. And with that, I am going to stop sharing and turn it over to Tyler Smith from the Nature Conservancy to talk about our land protection efforts.
All right, thank you, Jeanne. Sorry about that. All right. Yeah, thanks for having me here. I'm Tyler Smith with the Nature Conservancy, based out of Harrisburg, and I specifically work on land protection along the Kittatinny Ridge. So for my part of the presentation, I'll just describe some of the strategies the Nature Conservancy is using to help advance conservation across the ridge. And the most important thing that we found is partnership is key. So back in around 2015, the Nature Conservancy, along with a number of local land trusts that you see in the bottom right of the screen, created what we call the Kittatinny Ridge Land Protection Partnership. And basically, we work with the local land trusts to advance conservation along the ridge in terms of conservation easements and land acquisition. And we apply for a land protection partnership grant from DCNR, and then kind of funnel that money down through the Nature Conservancy and then out to the local land trusts. And what that does is basically helps kind of relieve a burden of finding funds for the land trust so that the land trusts can do their thing, which they're extremely effective, all the local land trusts, at doing land conservation in their areas. And they have a lot of local knowledge that the Nature Conservancy as a national organization doesn't always have. So by getting this larger grant that the Nature Conservancy can, put the work in, because many of the local land trusts are smaller and don't necessarily, want or need to waste time applying for funds, that the Nature Conservancy can kind of take care of that part and then funnel funds down to the land trust so that they can do the great work that they do. And the funds, they've helped to build capacity of different land trusts, help land trusts achieve LTA accreditation, as well as bring on more staff. We also use funds from the partnership grant, as well as from our own funders, to provide funds for due diligence or stewardship endowment of property. So these are those due diligence, stewardship, endowment are kind of the things you need to pay for to protect land that isn't the actual price of the property. And oftentimes projects can get hung up trying to find money for appraisals, surveys, or the money to steward and manage the land after acquisition or after an easement. So the Nature Conservancy has provided the land trusts with funds to cover that. And it's a great way to spend money, because we have found that a little bit of money can go a long way. And by giving $5,000 here, $10,000, $20,000 to land trusts for these funds, they can really take care of the rest. And we see a lot of land protection happen with just a small, in the grand scheme of things, a small input from the Nature Conservancy. What's also great working with a partnership like this is the land trusts provide match for the grant. So the more match we can get, the more we can ask for. And by bringing in so many people, that helps that to happen. And going on with the theme of partnership, the Nature Conservancy works with all these partners listed and many more to protect the ridge. We bring in funders like Trogs Independent Brewing, who last year created a beer called Trail Days for the ridge, and the proceeds from the beer went towards conservation. We also help use our science to direct funders like the William Penn Foundation, or create partnerships with entities like Fort Indiantown Gap, which is an Army base along the ridge, who is concerned with the protection of the ridge so that they can continue to complete their mission. So it's important for the Nature Conservancy, as well as all these partners, to work together to advance conservation on the ridge and accelerate the pace that we can do conservation. Next, the tool that we use, we call Natural Climate Solutions. And so this is looking at the forest on the ridge as helping to provide resiliency to climate change. We know forests are a carbon sink. We also know that they provide water and a plethora of other benefits to residents living around the ridge. So we look at the ridge as a place where we can enact natural climate solutions that will have broader global scope in terms of reducing climate change, but then also is benefiting the residents and the visitors to this area. Our most important program in our natural climate solutions is what we call the Working Woodlands Program. And so this program looks at large landowners, generally 2,500 acres or more. We can also combine landowners. So if there's a 1,000-acre landowner here, a 1,500-acre landowner over there, we can aggregate their forest And what happens is those forests get a conservation easement, and they are protected in perpetuity. They get a FSC Forest Stewardship Council Certification Management Plan. So this plan, we work directly with the landowners to create a management plan that will help them with their goals with the forest. If it's a hunt club, we can look at wildlife habitat. If it's a water authority, we can look at providing clean and high quality drinking water for residents. And so we can create that forest management plan to improve the status and the ecology of their forest. And finally, carbon credits. So how we get landowners to large landowners to jump on board with this program and conserve their land forever is carbon revenue. We access the voluntary carbon market. There's a lot of companies out there that are willing to pay into this, recognizing the benefits of offsetting their carbon. Companies like Chevy and Disney, they pay into this, and a landowner around 2,500 acres over 10 years can receive $500,000 to $600,000 over those 10 years. And that money they can put into protecting their land, improving the value of their land. Another program that we are currently in the pilot phase, well, we would have been piloting right now if it weren't for this crazy virus, is called Family Forest Carbon. And what this program does is looks at smaller landowners around less than 1,000 acres, so 30 to 1,000 acres with forest. And what they can do is enact different strategies, growing a mature forest, which is really leaving your forest alone and letting it to grow, or controlling invasive species on your property. And by doing this, you can receive carbon revenue funds to help enact these strategies to improve your forest health and also sequester and store more carbon. And finally, the Nature Conservancy is working with local communities and working with the government to increase knowledge and support for the Kittatinny Ridge. So this is a mural that we did in partnership with Trogs during the Harrisburg Mural Fest. It's on 3rd Street in Harrisburg, right in front of the state capitol. And it just represents the work that we're doing to work with the government, to work with the local populations in different towns and townships along the ridge, in Harrisburg and beyond, to understand the importance that this ridge has for the quality of life that we all have in South Central Pennsylvania. And what we've seen is this work, we've been involved since 2015, is a lot of success. So 21,000 acres protected along the Kittatinny Ridge since 2015. An additional 2,400 are scheduled to close this year. A large amount of those are from the local land trust. And so by having this great and unique and wide partnership, we've really been able to see a lot of progress on the ridge over the last 5 to 6 years. And that's all I got. So I'll be turning it over to my colleague, Dennis Shaffer at Appalachian Trail Conservancy.
Thank you, Tyler. I am trying to get my screen up, and when I hit screen share, Kimberly, it's not coming up.
So you, green arrow, I think we're getting there, possibly. And then go ahead and navigate to your presentation.
Why is it not coming up?
Dennis, mine says you are viewing Dennis' screen, so you might be good.
I am not seeing it.
Just if you go to your presentation.
There you
Yeah,
go.
there we go. Then
You have
to
it?
yep, go all the way to the first slide. And we can start the presentation.
And that's the end. Sorry. Okay. Can you see that?
Yes, we can.
and you can hear me. Well, thank you. Hi, everyone. Again, Dennis Shaffer, Director of Landscape Conservation for the Appalachian Trail Conservancy. I'm the lead staff for the Appalachian Trail Landscape Partnership, which is a coalition of conservation organizations and agencies co-convened by the Appalachian Trail Conservancy and the National Park Service, working to advance the scale of land conservation along the AT and its protected corridor. I'm happy to be able to follow Jeanne and Tyler's presentation about conservation along the Kittatinny Ridge. My presentation is going to feature the values of the AT and the importance of the Kittatinny Ridge and its importance to the Kittatinny Ridge and the Atlantic Flyway. I'm sure that all of you are familiar with the AT, and hopefully you've all had the opportunity to experience it and all that it has to offer. Unfortunately, you've also probably heard it's closed right now. As much as we all want to be able to get outside and enjoy places like the AT because of its iconic nature, it's became so popular that many of the trailheads and favorite spots and shelters and so forth became so overused as a getaway that there were impacts on the resources, and the trail. We're actually encouraging people not to use the Appalachian Trail right now, to seek other venues for your outdoor relaxation and meditation and retreat. So I will, in the context of today's discussion, I want to highlight the protected land base provided by the AT footpath and its narrowly protected public corridor, and the role this corridor plays in conservation along the Atlantic Flyway. So just a little bit of data on the scale and scope of the trail. It runs through 14 states, 2,190 miles, 8 national forests, 6 national park units, 2 national wildlife refuges, 8 natural landmarks, 60 state protected areas, 88 counties, 168 townships and municipalities. The footpath and its narrow corridor are nearly 100% protected, connecting many public lands and lands acquired by the National Park Service to protect the trail. The efforts that led to securing this long linear East Coast Greenway spanned 30 years, over 4,000 individual land transactions, and the acquisition of 280,000 acres of conservation lands, a great American conservation success story. We have intentionally not defined the boundaries of the AT landscape, but for visual and discussion purposes, we use the Huck 10 shell delineation. That's a watershed delineation. That's what this map represents, the blue line through the middle being the AT, the heavier black line surrounding it being the Huck 10 watershed boundaries. But the landscape is really defined by those of you who are working out there and the connections to the land that you and your organizations value. Here's another map that demonstrates the importance of the AT to the Kittatinny Ridge and the 4 other designated Pennsylvania conservation landscapes. So of the 8 designated conservation landscapes in Pennsylvania, the Appalachian Trail touches on 5 of those. The efforts to expand on the conservation backbone of the AT represent the next generation of Appalachian Trail protection. Through the AT Landscape Partnership, our hope is to expand on this protected land base. The AT and its surrounding lands are crossroads of ecological, recreational, scenic, economic, and cultural values. Our conservation partners are equally diverse in their missions and resources they're working to protect. And just like all of you working in the Pennsylvania Highlands Coalition, all of our organizations work on a wide variety, working to conserve a wide variety of conservation values. I'll share just a few examples to highlight the collaborative work that is impacting the Kittatinny Ridge, the AT landscape, and the greater Eastern Flyway. This map highlights the Eastern Wildway project of the Wildlands Network. As you can see, the Kittatinny Ridge and Eastern Flyway are all at the heart of the work of the Wildlands Network. And probably many of you are aware of or even involved in the wildlife corridors legislation that the Wildlands Network is championing. I'm sure most of you are familiar with this map produced by the Nature Conservancy. I just love the visual overlay that these projected flow patterns create on top of the AT landscape. I think it tells a really powerful story about the importance of conserving these lands. It depicts the Kittatinny Ridge as a critical link to the less congested landscapes, both to the north and the south. This map is as difficult to interpret at this scale, I apologize, but it represents the work done by the Open Space Institute using data from the Nature Conservancy and other sources to identify the most critical hotspots along the Appalachian Trail and in the surrounding landscape for mitigating the impacts of climate change. The Kittatinny Ridge is considered one of those hotspots. And Jeanne talked about the Hawk Mountain project. This is Rosalie. And so I won't go into any detail about that project, but I'll just say that Rosalie and many of the migrating species like her depend heavily on the AT landscape during their migration to and from their wintering grounds in South America. Consistent with the goals of the AT Landscape Partnership, conserving forested slopes, preventing forest fragmentation, and preserving productive farmland along the Kittatinny Ridge not only enhance the AT experience for hikers, but it's critically important to the long-term success of hawks and other long-distance migrators using this corridor. One of the programs that we initiated a couple years ago was the Wild East Action Fund in order to help drive conservation on the ground. Over the past 2 years, the Appalachian Trail Conservancy through the Wild East Action Fund has awarded about $1.3 million for land conservation across the AT landscape. In 2019, we received requests for over $350,000 for capacity building funding and more than $1 million in requests for land protection projects. That $1 million worth of requests for land protection projects actually represented more than $50 million in projects, and if fully funded and successful, that will represent the protection of more than 64,000 acres of conservation lands across the AT landscape. We'll be announcing the 2020 Wild East Action Fund grant program later this spring. And just to summarize, if you'd like to learn more about the Appalachian Trail Landscape Partnership, the Wild East Action Fund, and the work of the coalition of partners up and down the trail, visit the website at the Appalachian Trail Conservancy. And we're also just happy to provide anything that you might need if you just reach out to us. So I think that's it. Kimberly, I'm going to turn it back to you to facilitate any questions or discussion.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Yeah, we'll definitely kick it off with any questions or items of discussion. And so I'm looking here. Does everybody see the raise hand capability on their menu? Nice. Okay, so I'm seeing some raised. All right, so we're going to use that in order to ask your questions. So if you do have a question, go ahead and raise your hand, and then I'll address you by the name listed here and open it up for you to ask that question verbally. So let's go ahead and start with Carol. Carol, go ahead and ask your question. Nope.
I don't have a question.
Oh, okay. You were just helping us test the raise hand.
Yeah, but thanks for all your presentation, and I have another one I have to get on it too, so I do have to leave. But thank you.
Thanks for joining us, Carol. Anybody else with questions? You can use your raise hand function or go ahead and use the chat. All right, we have Dan here with a question. Go ahead, Dan. I can't hear him. Can you guys?
No.
All of these technical aspects are so interesting. All right, here we go. I think I got it now, Dan. Go ahead.
Okay, sorry about that.
Woo!
This question's for Dennis, and I was wondering about the Wild East Action Fund and what money is that funded with, and is there any projects in Pennsylvania that you could highlight over the last few years or?
Yep. Thanks, Dan, for the question. So the Wildlife Action Fund was made possible by support from the Volgino Foundation, a family foundation that has supported our work for a couple of years now. And we have funded projects in Pennsylvania. We funded a project with the Central Pennsylvania Conservancy. We funded a project with the Nature Conservancy. I'm sorry, I don't have the list in front of me, but there have been projects in Pennsylvania that we funded. The fund, there are two components to the fund. There's capacity building, which is to support partner organizations who are doing work on the ground. We've had requests for developing conservation plans, for developing communication materials and outreach materials. So the criteria are on our website. You can read about those there. And then the land protection grants, those funds are available for acquisition, for due diligence around acquisition, to support purchases of conservation easements or fee lands within the landscape.
Great, thanks, Dennis.
Sure. And like I said, we will be announcing the opening of the 2020 round later this spring. The typical timing has been, we'll announce late spring, we accept applications into early summer, and then usually announce the grants mid to late summer.
Wonderful. So I've got a few other questions coming in here on the chat. We have one from Susan W. And this is for Jeanne. She said, the video that you presented was great. How do we get wider dissemination of this type of information to the public?
Hello, thank you so much. We're really excited about the video and all of the products. What I'm trying to do is there are 8 ROEs completed on the Kittatinny, and I'll quickly list the counties. There are ROE studies for Lehigh, Northampton, Carbon, Dauphin, Perry, Cumberland, Lebanon, and Berks. So on our ROE page are the products that can be distributed. The video is on our Kittatinny Coalition YouTube channel. I think you can copy the link out of it. But if you have trouble accessing any of the information, please let me know and I'll make sure to get it to you. I take snippets out of the studies and I post them on Facebook and social media. That's one way I try to get it out. Also, if you're in any of these counties, please feel free to make sure officials know about these materials and can access them. And that we keep trying to produce studies and get more information out there.
Great, and I think those are all great suggestions. And of course, this is one of those opportunities where we share that those resources are available. So hopefully everybody who's with us today or watches this recording also knows that that information is even available to get out to our partners, networks, and decision makers as well. Another question that we have from Alexandra M. is, thanks for the presentation. You mentioned North America has lost a third of its bird population since the 70s. How has the bird population been able to recover thanks to the efforts of partner organizations of the Pennsylvania Highlands Coalition? So would anybody like to address how bird populations have been able to recover over the last several decades?
Well, I'll jump in and ask Tyler and Dennis to jump in too. I hope they're in recovery. We're trying to recover by protecting as much land as possible. That was Tyler's presentation. Land protection is a huge priority for the Kittatinny Coalition. Also through the municipal outreach, we are trying to encourage municipalities to have more environmentally friendly and supportive local policies. Natural Lands had an expression years ago, buy the best, zone the rest. So I would say, yes, these efforts are all about bird recovery, wildlife recovery, supporting our wildlife, supporting quality of life for people. And I would say recovery is a continuing effort, but I will let Tyler and Dennis chime in if they want to.
I'd say you pretty much got it pretty well, Jeannie. I would also add just management, not just protection of properties, but also proper management, encouraging appropriate management, because we know birds need a variety of habitats to live. So I know on a lot of the preserves that the Nature Conservancy owns or that we have easements on, we work towards providing, you know, the best habitat for bird species. And I know Jeannie is also, Audubon is doing some work with bird-friendly forestry that I think is exciting.
That's correct. Thank you. We have worked with TNC and we work with private and public forests up and down the ridge on stewardship.
I would just add, I'm not by any means able to speak with any authority on bird recovery. I guess what I would suggest, if you really are looking for hard data on those kinds of numbers, probably someplace like the Hawk Mountain Sanctuary would be a good resource. You know, anecdotally, it seems like there are species that are thriving, and then there are other species that are on significant decline. And I think it's probably somewhat driven by habitat, species, development densities and patterns and so forth.
Great, and we have another question here from Sally Z. Is there a known wildlife connection or sharing of habitat areas between the Kittatinny Ridge and the Pennsylvania Highlands? So I can answer that one a little bit. There is some overlap out on the western side of the Pennsylvania Highlands region that overlaps with the area of the Appalachian Trail. They are right next to each other and therefore related in that way. Does anybody have any more specifics on any types of wildlife migration, possibly besides the birds, that are a distinct connection between these two adjacent regions?
Kimberly, I would direct people to the Wildlands Network. That poster that I showed was based on some extensive modeling that they did, and one of the components of that was looking at areas of connectivity, looking at existing conserved lands, and overlaying that with wildlife population densities. And I think if you went to their website, you probably would find some good information on how those wildlife corridors are overlapping. And Pennsylvania is right in the heart of of the work that they did. So I think that area would be highlighted that you just referred to.
Thank you, Dennis. Yeah, and I think it was you who had mentioned some of the proposed legislation or bills supporting wildlife connections. I know there is one in Pennsylvania as well as a national wildlife corridors bill. And many of the organizations that work both within the conservation landscapes, whether it's Kittatinny Ridge, or we've had representatives here from the Schuylkill Highlands Conservation Landscape, or the organizations within the Pennsylvania Highlands, take a very close and careful look at that proposed legislation. And talk to our decision makers about it. Many of the organizations are kind of on the ground doing the work to put that language together based on their organization's scientific studies and other collaborations on this idea of wildlife connectivity.
The other suggestion I have for Sally is something we might do for the group, Kimberly, is I can overlay the Highlands, and we probably both can overlay the Highlands geography and the Ridge geography, which I've done before, but we could snip it, send it out if people want to see it on a map.
Sure, yeah, I think that would be a great follow-up, and just for all of us to kind of know as well.
Yeah, there's definitely some overlap.
Well, good here. And being mindful of time, we have one more quick question with 3 minutes to go in our hour from Mark Z asking, are there any other important public or private funding sources that the panel would like to highlight?
I know the Chesapeake Bay has some grant opportunities out that are due toward the end of April. Like the Small Watersheds Grant, there's another one. I'm trying to think.
Well, the Pennsylvania DCNR grants are all, the deadline's coming up very soon.
Right.
For the Pennsylvania program.
As well as if there's anybody who's in our audience who has a public or private funding source they'd like to highlight, you can raise your hands and I'd be happy to unmute you to do that as well.
And of course, I'm sure everybody in the audience is advocating strongly for permanent funding for LWCF and the Highlands Act, the Highlands area, and all across all of the Highland states has been actually designated for LWCF funding. So a significant amount of money is coming through the Land and Water Conservation Fund for the Highlands.
Yes, absolutely, Dennis. And we hoped to finally secure full permanent dedicated funding and have the ability to have even more of those federal Land and Water Conservation Fund and Highlands Conservation Act monies come to both of these regions, to Pennsylvania.
Yep.
All right, well, we wanted to give another warm thank you for everybody for joining us today. Have a great rest of your afternoon.
Thank you.
You too. Thanks for joining.
Thank you.